Holland, thank you for welcoming me, and good to have the First Lady of UVU here, and many of the people who support the university appreciate the work that you're doing, and good to have students here. I was told this is largely a student group, but as I'm looking around, this is a very old student body, all right? So there are some students here. We'll let them offer their questions as we go along. Perhaps we'll end with those questions. You asked me about the global economy and what's going to happen in the global economy, and I don't know. And what will the environment be like? I don't know that either. I think anytime an economist is giving you a projection, it's based upon current settings, and it's very difficult to project something which is a disruptive event. And it is disruptive events that cause major shifts in the economy, and I don't know when or if they will happen. There are circumstances on the planet today which suggest that disruptive events could easily occur. And there are other circumstances in our past which looked so stable that you didn't worry too much. But right now, you can think of a number of them. Gasoline prices so low, that's very, very good news for people who are filling their tank. They now have more money to spend to buy things. That should encourage our economy. On the other hand, gasoline prices so low probably have a big impact on a number of nations that produce a lot of oil or gas. And that includes Russia and Venezuela and obviously many others, Nigeria and so forth. That's highly disruptive. What would happen if a major economy in the world found it couldn't meet its obligations and had to default on its debt? Why, that would have impact on banking institutions that might have invested in those bonds. Those banks might find themselves getting in difficulty. You could see a series of catapulting events that would cause a major disruption in the world. Number two, we're seeing good economic growth in the U.S., but the rest of the world is having a harder time these days. And we're seeing that in part because their GDP numbers aren't good, but also just looking at oil. I mean, one of the reasons oil prices are so low is because we're producing more oil, a lot more oil, and the Saudis are also producing at the normal level, and so supply is long. New supply has come on board, but also demand hasn't picked up like people thought it would. And when you don't see people buying a lot of gasoline, it suggests, well, maybe there's some weakness out there. So that obviously could affect the global economy and could pull the American economy into some kind of vortex. I don't think that's going to happen myself, but it's possible. Central banks have no idea how to deal with what's going on, from what I can tell. Some are quantitative easing as quickly as they can. Others are putting on brakes. So central banks don't give you a lot of confidence. And then, of course, there's the threat of Islamism, radical, violent jihadism. And it has affected not just Nigeria and Yemen and Paris in the last few days, but around the world. It is a growing presence, and the development of ISIS having grabbed major portions of the Levant gives to a terror group, an Islamist, a fundamentalist terror group, it gives them vast economic resources. I mean, we've dealt with Al-Qaeda in the past, which is bad enough and continues to be bad. But ISIS now has land, a lot of land, and a lot of financial resources. So could that disrupt affairs in the world? I mean, I think you look and say, you hope for stability, but I can assure the young people in the room that during their career, there will be at least one or two or three major events with economic consequences that you wouldn't have anticipated. That'll be very tough. And all I can tell you is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And prepare for the worst by saying, what would I do if things got tough? Don't overextend and take on additional debt that you can't possibly meet. Don't invest in just one thing and hope that one thing comes through for you in a big way. Try and have a preservation of your capital in good times and bad. And but other than that, I don't know that you can forecast what's going to happen. If you can, why, obviously you'll make a great fortune. But I mean, I was in the investment business for 15 years. And we said we're going to invest in good times and bad. And when in times like this, with interest rates at near zero and prices for businesses and real estate very, very high, why, going out and buying things like companies or real estate, you have to be very careful and cautious and look for things where you think you can create more value than is already there. Because as interest rates come back up, if they did, why, you could find yourself facing real economic difficulty. So this is a time for caution, but it's not a time for hiding. and running in the opposite direction. It just says be more careful. And then, by the way, when things get real cheap again, when companies are cheap or real estate's cheap, then buy as much as you can. And I remember in the investment world, I was at Bain Capital, and this was when Texas collapsed. Oil prices collapsed. Home values were terrible in Texas. Everything in Texas was awful. We went and bought everything we could. Every business we saw that was a sound business that looked like it would be able to withstand the downturn, we acquired. And when Texas came back, we did very, very well. So these times, be careful and selective. When tough times come, as they always do, that's a time for much more aggressive investment. And by the way, in my opinion, most great fortunes are made by people who recognize there is a cycle. There will always be good times and bad times. And you typically sell in the good times and buy in the bad times. And most people do the opposite. They buy when things are high because they think they're going to get better and better and better. And they sell when things are bad because they think it's always going to be awful. And guess what? Awful times are always replaced by good times, and vice versa. So, that's all the advice I got on the economy. I can't forecast it. I think Yogi Berra had it right. He said, I don't like forecasting, particularly if the future's involved. And I subscribe to that same sentiment. All right, question 2.
Question 2. On a personal front, any lessons from early on in your career, your perspective on the most important experiences you've had, and what advice you might give these future business people here today?
When I was beginning my career, it was suggested to me that I read a book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. I wish that's all it took, is just thinking to grow rich. But his idea was that if you set a goal for yourself and you think about it day in and day out, why, you're very likely to achieve that goal. That is not how my life has worked. I have looked at other books that told you that you should try and chart where you're going to go, what you're going to do in life. I've never found that to work for me. Some of you may have that experience, that you can lay out where you're going to go. But my career didn't follow anything at all like I planned. I wanted to be an executive of an automobile company, like my dad. Grew up in Detroit, loved cars. That's what I wanted to do. So after I got started in business school and law school, I went and took a summer job at Chrysler Corporation, and I hated it. It was awful. I mean, I was so many layers down deep in the company, and it was so bureaucratic, I'd never get a chance to. I had to be there 20 or 30 years before I might have some influence. It's like, boy, I don't want to do this. It was so different than I imagined. So I did something completely out of the blue. And the biggest departure from my normal business path was coming here and meeting some people like Spence Eccles and others who convinced me to come here and take on the Olympics. There really wasn't any logic for me taking this job. It didn't pay any money. I had a business that was doing very, very well. And after all, I was not a great athlete. My boys pointed out the irony in my taking the job. We have a family Olympics, we call it, the Romney Olympics in the summer, where we do these various events, 5 boys and me. I always come in 6th, unless one of them gets hurt, which I try and engineer every year. And I've now added lumberjacking to this, which means we have a sawing competition through a big log, and then we have driving nails. That's the one I stand a chance in. That's what I come in. But the other events, they beat me. And so when I took the job to come here with the Olympic team, my oldest son, my boys knew about it, but when it was announced publicly, my oldest son called and said, Dad, we looked at the paper this morning. I've talked to the brothers. We want you to know there's not a circumstance we could have conceived of that would put you on the front page of the sports section. And there I was. So my career advice is to do your present job well, whatever it is. Don't moan and groan about the job you got. All right? Just put your head down and work as hard as you possibly can to do your present job well. That's number 1. And then number 2, keep your eyes open. Look at the enterprise you're working in and see what things are being done and not done so well. What services are being provided to your enterprise that are good and which are bad? Which products need improving? Look for opportunities. Look for problems that need to be solved. And maybe you'll find the occasion to start an enterprise of your own if that's your dream. It's been interesting to me to see some of the most successful entrepreneurs I've known have had ordinary jobs in larger enterprises, and they've seen something that didn't make sense to them. Tom Stemberg working in a grocery store chain, was irritated that at the prices he had to pay for pencils and paper and rubber bands and paper clips. He said, this is an outrage that you pay so much for office supplies. Why? And they come and deliver them to you. And these guys and they give you tickets to the sporting events, if you buy supplies from them. He said, there's all this markup, all this money being made just to buy pencils and paper. So we decided to start a company which would sell office supplies at a 50% discount from what he was seeing purchased by the company he worked in. And that became Staples and a great success. A guy at the Sports Authority, same thing. Some guys looked at that and said, we can sell sporting goods for much lower price than these little specialty stores, and began that and made a great success. I could go on, but these are people who had a job and saw something that looked like they could make it better. So do your present job well, but keep your eyes wide open for those things that aren't being done well around you. All right.
Actually, what we're going to do now is, if you don't mind.
Do whatever you'd like.
Ooh. That's a scary thought. No, what we'd like to do now is, as we got through some of our prepped questions, we wanted to open it up to the students since you're going to give us that flexibility. Yep. So, students, I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit. If any of you have a question for Governor Romney, now is your opportunity to ask him any question you might like that he may or may not answer for you. Okay? Over here. Back in the wall, back wall.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Miss. Professor Smith, are you here? There he is. All right. Hi.
Rumor has it via Professor Smith that Senator Hatch is proposing some tax reform. What is your perspective on this, and how do you support him or part of his discussion?
I have not seen Senator Hatch's specific proposals on tax reform, but we have a very complex tax system which has been built piecemeal over many, many decades, and it's been lobbied very heavily. Various groups come in and lobby for some provision they think will be helpful to their industry, and in many cases that makes some sense, or it did when it was put in decades ago. It may not make much sense now. Our taxes are extraordinarily complex, both individually, but also for corporations. Large corporations spend many, many millions on preparing their taxes, and so in many cases the tax policy isn't encouraging the kind of long-term investment I'd like to see. I'm concerned about the fact, and it's an increasing concern, that American enterprise is shorter and shorter term in its outlook and its perspective. Shareholders want quarterly earnings. They want to see quarterly earnings. They want to see what you'll do this year. So if you have a plan, for instance, to invest, if you're, let's say, GE, billions of dollars in research for a new product that won't see the market for 10 years, good luck. The shareholders don't want that. And yet for America, we do want that. And our tax policy probably ought to reflect our interest in innovation, investment, long-term growth of enterprises, investment in our people and our workers. And we don't do that, I don't think, in as effective a way as we might. So I'd like to see tax reform. I think we're more likely to see corporate tax reform, perhaps, than individual tax reform. There's a lot of energy around these topics, obviously, and passion, and a lot of people who are afraid their ox is going to be gored. They've worked for years to get a special deal for them or their industry, and they're afraid that if someone opens the book and starts looking through these things, that they might lose that special deal. So there'll be a lot of pushback against reform, but I think it makes sense. My own view is that most of the major problems the country faces, and I'll talk about this later if any of you are going to be at the event in the large room downstairs. You'll be listening in. I'll be talking about the fact that, in my view, almost every major issue, challenge faced by the country has been unaddressed in the last decade or so. Not even an attempt to deal with it. And I watched the State of the Union last night. The president, I thought, was wise to speak about middle-income opportunity and the squeeze of middle-income families, but no prescriptions as to how to make things better for the American family. So tax reform, I'm all for it. We'll have to look at what we're talking about. My proposal was bring the rates down for businesses and for individuals, and eliminate a lot of the deductions and exemptions and credits and so forth, so that the rates are lower and it's much simpler for people to pay their taxes at lower rates. Yeah, thank you. Another, yeah, right before in front, yeah.
So, with participating in Bain Capital, when you went into a company,
In some cases, you like to keep that good culture. In some cases, it's a terrible culture. And you're saying, okay, we got to break the culture down. We had a consultant come to us when I was at Bain Capital, investment business. This consultant said, "Did you read the story of the shareholder meeting at Baker Hughes Corporation?" I said, "No." He said, paraphrasing, he said the chief executive was asked, "What about the Vetco Gray division? How long is the company going to hold on to it?" Because Vetco Gray lost $72 million in the prior year. So the CEO was asked this question. He said, I'd get rid of that division for $1 if somebody would buy it. So we went down there with $1 and said, "We're here." It lost $72 million. Probably this is a big enterprise, right? And he said, "Well, I was just joking about the dollar." And so they hired an investment bank to go out and auction the business, and we bought it for $1. Now, we had to sign up for a lot of debt, too, because there's a lot of debt in the books. But we looked at that business and said, there's not a lot that's working in the culture there. And what we have to do, believe it or not, in a setting like that, you might think all we were thinking about was cost-cutting. But when we looked at the business, by the way, they make subsea wellheads and something called subsea Christmas trees. Those are the great big structures that drilling towers are on and that produce oil and computer controls. A big international firm in Houston, California, Aberdeen, Scotland, and so forth, Norway. And we looked at the business and went out and talked to customers. And the customers said, it's a nice company, but their products are old and they're not as good as their competitor. We said, "Who's their competitor?" Oh, it turns out the guy that used to be head of R&D at the company had left, started his own company with a better product. And that's entrepreneurship, wide eyes. He was watching and saw an opportunity and did that. And so we said, this company we've just invested in and bought for $1, the first thing we have to do is invest millions and millions more in research and development of new products, or we'll be gone. So we put a lot of money and lost a lot of money. On the books, it looked like we were losing money, but we were investing for the future. And the business turned around with new products, became profitable. And down the road, a major corporation, ABB Corporation, acquired the company and because it was profitable and very successful. So I guess the key for us was this, in making an investment. And I mentioned this earlier. In my view, there are two types of investment. One is one where you know what you're going to do to a business. You're going to run it or you're going to participate in it, and you're going to guide it to build capital for yourself and for others who invest with you. That's something, that's your business. Then the other is preservation of your capital. In the latter category, preservation of capital, you want high diversification, good managers of different kinds that are helping invest. That's preservation of capital. I was in the business of trying to turn around businesses that I was going to be personally involved with. And so when we looked to make an investment of that nature, we looked at a company and said, do we see something no one else sees? And can we make it better? And sometimes we were right. Not always. Sometimes we got it wrong. We'd do our analysis and take it apart. We were convinced we were going to make it lots better. But, in fact, it didn't work out like we thought it would. I remember we helped invest a business called Presidential Airlines. The CEO of this company came to us and said, what? Every airline needs a hub and spoke system. We agreed. And he said, there's not one on the East Coast. Between places like Florida and Boston and New York, there's not a hub there. And he looked at Washington, D.C. and said we could put a hub in Washington, D.C. and fly people to Florida and New York and Boston. This would be a perfect place for a hub. And there's no hub there. We said, great idea, invested. And then United Airlines and Delta agreed and put their hub in Washington, D.C. too. And now we were really in trouble. That company's gone. All right, that happens. But we would look to find some way that we thought we could do something others hadn't seen and make it better. And in some cases, blow up the culture. In other cases, preserve the culture. Sometimes look to bring in new managers that had new vision. Other times, the manager there, the first investment we made that was successful, they made wheels for trucks. And the chief executive officer said, what? We could make a lot more money if we went out and tried to get 100% of the business in this market. We said, well, you can't do that. He was right. You could. He got 100% of the wheel business for trucks, for the trailer, the tractor, the front part of the truck. Not the big trailer behind, but the tractor in front. And we got 100% of the business, and we did real well. He had the vision. We agreed with him. Yeah, thanks. Other questions?
Questions? Go ahead. We're just going to
Yes. Yes, sir.
What would you recommend to a student with ambitions in going into venture capital to do to prepare to kind of stand out against the crowd?
For someone that wants to get into venture capital, how do you distinguish yourself on your resume so that a venture capital firm might take a look at you? The challenge is any employer sees extraordinary candidates with high GPA, good involvement in extracurricular activities, good board scores. If they ask at Bain, we used to ask people, what was your GMAT score? That's the exam you take to get into business school. What's your SAT? We'd ask them, get all that data. And the companies will see all sorts of real bright people. What will distinguish them in many cases is not just the interview, but what things they've done in fields that are related to what they do. And so choose your summer jobs wisely. And try and get a summer job where you'll get good experience. And so that means don't worry about, you're paying a lot of money to go to school typically and racking up loans. For the summertime, if you can afford it, working someplace as an intern and saying, I just want to be here and see what you're doing. I'll clean out the waste baskets at the end of the day, you name it, but I want to be here. I want to see how the business works. Getting that experience, being able to be there in a venture capital enterprise or in a financial services enterprise that services venture capital will enhance the probability that people will give you a run at it when you come out of school.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
In the current economic landscape, do you see any industries that are maybe set to thrive or vice versa? Maybe some opportunities?
I would have said a few months ago, energy, all right, oil field services and so forth. I'd have said, boy, that looks great. Look at North Dakota. Roosevelt, Utah. All these places are just going to take off, and they took off, but not upward. They're just as a result of world events, overproduction and under demand. They've just really collapsed. I'm not very good at predicting which sectors of the economy are going to be successful. I'm very good at predicting which enterprise will succeed and which competitors will lose. So I can go into a group of companies and figure out which one has the right management and the right vision to succeed, and I'll buy their stock, or if in my prior life I'd try and buy the company and invest in that enterprise. There are some things which I think you would appreciate. I happen to think that data and all things relating to data and processing, that's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And so I'm a big believer in high tech and think it will continue to be an enormous source of growth for our economy and for the world. I'm delighted with the fact that we lead the world in those things relating to information and data processing, entertainment, all of these things we're leading. Hopefully we can keep that lead. Obviously, healthcare. Healthcare is going to be a larger and larger share of our economy, in part because people like me are getting old. Some of you think I already am old, but as the baby boomers get older and older, they're going to need a lot of health care. And as the baby boomers get older, they're going to start spending more money. And there's a lot of money that's been saved for retirement that's going to come out. And where will they spend it? They're not going to buy things so much because they have most of the things they need or want. They're going to buy experiences, places to go, hotels and travel. Although, one of the things I'll note is that Mark Andreessen, who's a famous venture capitalist, founder of Netscape, said at a conference I hold here regularly, he said, software eats everything. Software eats everything. Every business is going to be eaten by software. It's going to be changed fundamentally. And he started going through and ticking off business by business. I mentioned travel and experiences as something senior citizens are going to want to do with their savings. Well, there's Airbnb now, where people can stay in other people's homes or apartments. So maybe hotels are going to they will change. And there's Uber as a way to get around as opposed to just taxis and limo services. All these things are changing. So if you can find a place where there are good growth economics, meaning seniors coming in with more money or tech or health care and so forth, and if you can also see changes that are going to occur in that area, in part because of software or other dimensions, that's a place where it's a very sweet spot for investing. And one of the things we saw, I'll just note, we looked at child care. This is some years ago at Bain Capital, and a fellow came to us and said, it's a real pain to have to take my child in the morning to a kinder care center have to drive there. I'm in line, have to get out of my car, take my child in, then back in my car, then I have to drive downtown to go to work, and then at the end of the day, I got to go back to kinder care to pick up my child and take him home. He said, wouldn't it be nice if there were a place at my work site that took care of my child? And we thought that was a good idea. He wanted to be the CEO, but we didn't figure he had the skills to lead an enterprise like that, so we hired a couple. They'd just come back from Africa where they were with the Save the Children Foundation. Husband and wife team, hired them as co-CEOs for something called Bright Horizons Children's Centers. It's now the largest child care company in the world. And they do all their child care at the work site. So in a building like the largest buildings here, at the Wells Fargo building, for instance, they'd think of having a child care center there so people could drop off kids. And by the way, if the child gets sick during the middle of the day, they can call the parent to come down and pick them up and get them home. I mean, it's a wonderful concept with great leadership. And so seeing those developments and taking advantage of them, I think, is a great way to create opportunity for yourself and for others. With
About 2 more questions.
Yes, sir.
How did you balance family life, work life, and all your different hats?
Everybody will do that in a different way. How do you balance the different parts of your life? And I'll tell you how I did that, and it actually worked. I have to be honest. I joke, and I joked earlier today on this topic by saying that if I felt that I wasn't doing as much as the other people at work were doing, I was shortchanging a bit at work, and I was also not spending as much time with my family as I needed to. And if I wasn't doing as much with my church assignments as I needed to, then things were in balance, all right, because I was shortchanging everything. And there is some truth to that, by the way. But what happened to me is I was in law school, at Harvard Law School. I'd come from Brigham Young. I figured I would be lucky if I made it through that place without flunking out. So I was working like crazy. Every minute I was studying. And if I wasn't studying, if I was going to McDonald's with the kids or taking them to a movie, there was like this black cloud hanging over me, which is, you should be studying. You should be studying. You're going to flunk out. And at one point, I finally said, you know what? I'm actually going to do something, not so much because of religion as much as just because of good common sense. I'm going to take one day a week, Sunday, and I'm going to say to myself, I'm not going to study on Sunday. And it was a remarkable thing. For the whole day of Sunday, which I spent with my kids and church and so forth, for the whole day I didn't feel guilty because I decided I wasn't going to study. And it was just marvelous how much that freed my life and allowed me to fully engage with my kids and the other assignments in my life. And one more in that regard, which is when I came home, when I began work, when I was in school, I studied at night. I came home, I studied till late at night. But when I started my job, when I came home at the end of the day, I did not bring work with me. When I came in the door, no more work. Now, if there was an emergency of some kind or a big presentation, that was an exception. But by and large, when I was home, it was with the family. And so when you draw little lines like that and decide what you're going to do beforehand and you compartmentalize parts of your life, it gives you full experience during the times that you've set aside for family, for faith, for community, for charity, for sporting events that you're coaching, or for school or job. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
One last question. Let's do the last question.
Yeah, what's been your biggest driver? I mean, when you're doing all that, when you have to keep a balance, it's tiring. Like, you kind of get burnt out sometimes. I mean, what drives you? Is it to be influential, to be successful in business?
And the answer is Anne. The truth is Anne drives me and is the source of joy in my life. We share everything. I know all marriages aren't like that, and some marriages are awful, and some are wonderful. Anne and I grew up together. She was 15 when we started to date, and we've been in love ever since, and exchange everything and make all of our decisions together. We rarely disagree. It's kind of scary now that we think so much alike, in part because we grew up together. I know some people who got married young end up growing apart, and it doesn't work. But we were of a different sort in that regard, and we grew together, and that makes life a lot better. I'll tell you, it's wonderful having a partner who shares your life in every way, your successes and your defeats. My boys call Ann the Mitt stabilizer. because she's like the guardrails on the side of the highway. I tend to want to veer off. I become my old friend Bill Bain, that started Bain and Company, used to say to me, "Things are never as good as you think, nor as bad as you think. They're never that good, and they're never that bad." And Ann reminds me of that. She keeps me balanced. And what I think, who was it? The founder of Hires Big H. Do you know Hires Big H? Do you know that? Yeah, you know Hires. In his little book, there's a little booklet you can buy at the cash register, and his name. What is his name again? I can't remember. Dan Hale, but first name is. But anyway, last name is Hale. Don Hale. Don Hale. He said, "You will have a great life if you have a happy marriage, if you have something to do, someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to." So I had someone to love, and then kids added to that. I had something to do, which is I had a job. People who go into retirement with nothing to do, I think it's harder. So something to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. You got to have something to look forward to. When Ann was raising our 5 boys, it was just a nightmare for her. But she concluded she had to have 1 hour a day to look forward to, where she would leave the house and go play tennis with friends. 1 hour a day. She got a babysitter to come in 1 hour a day. And that made all the difference. Something to look forward to. And whether it's day to day, week to week, vacations, always have something fun to look forward to. So that was the motivator. Ann's love, the fun I enjoyed at work. I like my work. I enjoyed work. Still do. And then something to look forward to. You guys, thank you for your welcome. I look forward to being with you a little later this year. President, good to be with you.